I'm Dwight Drummond. Tonight, two teens are under arrest, accused in a string of East End carjackings.
Alleged that these two individuals committed 10 carjackings, 8 within the city of Toronto and 2 in Durham region.
The two arrested while out driving one of the stolen cars. They're now facing dozens of charges. Plus,
the delays that we've seen in Canada are just astronomical.
I know it's frustrating. We're going to do everything we can to provide the resources they need.
Ottawa says it has a plan to fix the delays at Pearson, but one former industry insider says the worst could be yet to come. And
I am overwhelmed. I am honored. I'm humbled.
We'll hear from the longtime librarian and educator who's getting a Parkdale school named after her. Toronto police have arrested two teens in a string of gunpoint carjackings. The hold-up squad alleges the 19 and 17-year-olds used the stolen vehicles as getaway cars to commit other crimes. Alicia Son has more.
The Toronto Police hold-up squad is starting to make up ground and putting an end to the violent carjackings plaguing the city.
We have laid 100 charges against a 19-year-old man and a 17-year-old boy as a result of this investigation.
Project Zigzag focused on 10 carjackings in about a 10-day span last month in Scarborough.
During these incidents, the suspect was armed with a handgun and would approach victims in their driveways, demanding their keys, ultimately to get their vehicles.
Unlike many of the other carjackings we've seen across the GTA, the police allege these suspects weren't targeting high-end vehicles with the intent to resell them. Instead, they say these suspects stole the vehicles and they used those as getaway cars to commit other crimes like robberies. Those vehicles were eventually found abandoned, and so far the evidence doesn't suggest that this was part of a larger, more sophisticated operation than that.
At this time, the case does not appear to have any ties to organized crime.
Which is what's believed to be behind the spate of carjackings across the GTA targeting high-end vehicles, including that of Toronto Maple Leaf player Mitch Marner last month. There's a larger, multi-jurisdictional investigation looking into this. In the meantime, you're being reminded to protect yourself.
These little things here are being used to mark a vehicle.
Toronto police releasing this video on TikTok about the tracking devices perpetrators use to target cars.
It could be hidden behind a license plate, it could be hidden in the trailer hitch receiver, or even in a gas tank cap area. And once you go home, they just track their device to your driveway. If there's one of these on your vehicle, I recommend that you call your local police department.
Even though today's arrests are a drop in the bucket.
The end game, of course, is to put a stop to the carjackings and also look for who's behind these, who's actually facilitating the carjackings to take place.
Alicia Chiasson, CBC News, Toronto.
The province announced today that as of Saturday, masks will no longer be required in most high-risk settings, including on public transit. Mask mandates had previously been extended, but the chief medical officer says given high vaccination rates and improving COVID infection data, Dr. Kieran Moore says the province is ready for this step. But not all medical experts agree. Chris Glover reports.
On public transit, masks will no longer be mandatory as of Saturday morning. Some medical experts say the rule should have been extended again for a few more weeks.
Some of our public transit is just absolutely jammed cheek to jowl. And if you have warm weather, the windows are closed, a lot of people very close together, it can be unsafe for some people.
Masks will still be required at long-term care and retirement homes. It all comes as wastewater data shows COVID transmission has dropped sharply across Ontario since early April. Plus, there are 200 fewer people in hospital with COVID compared to last Wednesday.
If we remove mask requirements from public transit, we will see a rise in cases. There's no doubt in my mind we will. We will also exclude a lot of people from taking rapid transit if they are at really high risk. So we create a dangerous situation and we exclude. It's not a good idea.
Infectious disease expert Colin Furness says it's a problem that the province is not transparently making these decisions based on COVID benchmarks like wastewater surveillance data.
We're not being science-driven. If we were, it would be very simple to define milestones. We can make it just like the UV index to tell people how concerned to be. Of course, we could be doing that, but we're not. And I think we're not because we're dealing with this as a political problem.
We asked for an interview with the chief medical officer today. Instead, we got a statement, part of which read the province will continue to monitor for any significant changes, including any new variants of concern, to ensure we are adapting our response. On Saturday, provincial rules around masks will be revoked at hospitals as well. But regardless, hospitals like UHN say they will keep mask requirements, especially due to immunocompromised patients.
I do think that masks are a really important measure that you can keep in place, especially as other things are loosening up around us.
Even as many of the last provincial rules are being lifted, many medical experts anticipate masks will be required in colder months.
This is not static, this is dynamic. Cases will go up again in the fall and the winter, and I think it's very reasonable for people to be putting masks back on in those settings if that happens.
Continuing to stress, just wear a mask if you can. Chris Glover, CBC News, Toronto.
Ottawa says it's working on a plan to alleviate the long lines and delays facing travelers at Pearson Airport. But according to one former airline industry insider, the problems could get worse before things improve. Greg Ross is live out at Pearson for us tonight. And Greg, is there any chance the delays can be resolved before the summer travel rush in a few weeks?
Well, Dwight, the federal government says that they are taking steps to rectify this problem, like bringing in more staff at airports across the country, and they're easing some of the COVID-19 travel guidelines. But some critics say that those measures may not go far enough. And if that is the case, that could be a huge problem as we enter what will undoubtedly be the busiest travel season that we've seen in 3 years.
This year, it's supposed to be 3 to 4 times bigger than they were in 2021.
Duncan Dee is the former chief operating officer at Air Canada. He says after being grounded by the pandemic for so long, people are itching to travel again this summer.
You've got Canadians who have been planning this particular holiday for 2 years.
If they're flying out of Pearson, they may need to prepare for long lineups getting through security. Some travelers we spoke to today were pre-warned about these issues by their airlines.
I got a message to arrive a lot earlier than normal.
Just the check-in notice from Air Canada said leave lots of time.
The government says they're beefing up the workforce to alleviate the problem.
We are adding additional CBSA officers. We're also adding additional CATSA officers.
They've hired 400 new airport security agents at Pearson who are expected to be trained and in place by the end of the month. But Dee says the government knew about the problem months ago and should have had them in place long before now.
When the government decides to put brand new rookie screeners on the screening lines at the start of the peak, it's a recipe for disaster.
Many international travelers flying into Pearson have experienced huge delays as well.
Customs was about 3 hours, got through, flight canceled from Toronto to Boston. All right, at this point, now I go and I see there is a 400-person line.
Former NHLer turned podcaster Ryan Whitney took to social media to complain about the issues he had connecting through Pearson last week. Dee says these issues are largely due to COVID protocols in place at customs.
What happens to an international traveler? They get to the officer, they've got to provide them with their vaccination certificate, they've got to provide them with their ArriveCAN QR code, and they have to determine whether or not they'd be selected for random testing.
Dee says screening at customs now takes on average 4 times longer than it did pre-pandemic. The Minister of Transportation says they're working to ease some of these delays.
International travelers who have a connecting flight now are no longer eligible for random testing.
Now, some of the airport staff here tell me that because things get so backed up at customs, often passengers flying in from other countries are forced to sit in their planes after landing on the tarmac and wait for those lines to clear up at customs. And then when they're finally allowed to get off their plane, they often have to wait in long lines at customs. Sometimes it could be hours. And then even after that, some are randomly selected to be tested for COVID-19, and that means they have to jump into another line. So as you can imagine, Dwight, this is causing a lot of frustration here at the airport when it is busy like that.
Yeah, we've been hearing about this mess for weeks now. Thank you, Greg. So at least you don't have to fly off anywhere to get some sunshine right now, Miss Dahlia. It's nice out there. It could be a little hotter for me, though.
That's right. I mean, today would have been a good day to fly with the temperature and the dry conditions, but tomorrow, not so much, because we're getting those wet conditions again But first, let's start off. Normally this time of year, we're sitting at 23 degrees, but today temperatures are at 22 degrees, so just a bit below the normal high for this time of year. The normal low, 13 degrees, and today's low is 11 degrees. The current temperature in Toronto, 20 degrees. Not humid like it was yesterday. The cooler side would be Windsor. Kingston also on the cooler side, 17 degrees. The hot spot across the region today would be Ottawa. And as we can see here, if we take a look at Southwest, we can see that the precipitation is starting to make its way from south of the border, making its way closer to Toronto. If we take a closer look, it's starting to peek through, but not quite yet. We'll have that by the evening. Overnight tonight, it will rain, 40% chance of rain, 14 degrees, and winds will be gusting northwesterly at 20 kilometers an hour. And those wet conditions will continue for tomorrow afternoon, 23 degrees, and a risk of thunderstorm, and winds will gust as well, 20 kilometers an hour.
Thank you, Dahlia.
This weather update is brought to you by Charlevoix Train, one of the most beautiful railways in Canada. Discover this spectacular railway from Quebec City.
The Ontario Medical Association wants more healthcare resources added for LGBTQ people. It's using this Pride Month as a time to highlight the disparities. Lorena Redekop explains.
The Pride Parade will return in a few weeks for the first time since before the pandemic. While the event is a big party, today some medical professionals had a reminder that healthcare is among the areas this community still experiences inequalities. They took part in an online panel. One expert says surgery wait times for trans people are up to 2 years for top surgery, more than 5 years for vaginoplasty.
Wait times for gender-affirming surgery are too long, and really they would not be accepted without immediate action across pretty much any other types of surgical care.
Mental health issues are more common in the LGBT community, so are substance use issues. One doctor raised that during the pandemic, many of her patients left Toronto and went to rural areas, where less health care can be a struggle, even more so for that community. She wants medical schools to do better in training physicians.
Now, it really also incumbent on staff and faculty to push forward, ensuring these competencies are taught in medical school and in residency programs. And right now, there doesn't exist any kind of national standard.
There was one piece of good news.
This is a new clinic about to open in July.
One doctor spoke from a new clinic specific for gay men and trans people. It'll have both mental and sexual health services, with a self-serve sign-in and fast results for sexually transmitted infections.
People will be able to come in, answer some questions, collect their own samples, and the availability of an on-site laboratory will mean that we are able to give rapid results texted to patients' phones within 4 hours of their testing.
He says that's invaluable, and that evidence from other countries regarding HIV found faster results equals less transmission. Lorena Redekop, CBC News, Toronto.
The monkeypox outbreak has now grown to more than 1,000 cases.
The sudden and unexpected appearance of monkeypox in several non-endemic countries suggests that there might have been undetected transmission for some time. How long? We don't know. The risk of monkeypox becoming established in non-endemic countries is real.
The Public Health Agency of Canada is warning travelers to be extra careful abroad because of the potential threat of catching the disease, adding travelers could find themselves subjected to isolation or other measures to limit the spread of the virus. The WHO says more than 1,000 cases of monkeypox have now been reported outside countries in Africa, where it is more commonly known to spread. Monkeypox often causes skin lesions. It spreads through close contact, including respiratory droplets in the air, skin-to-skin contact, or if someone touches contaminated surfaces. The federal government has named a person to work as an intermediary for Indigenous communities and Ottawa. Kimberly Murray is the former executive director of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She will act on behalf of communities dealing with the discovery of unmarked graves at former residential school sites.
I look forward to meeting with you, coming to your communities, and hearing from leadership and survivors about the challenges communities continue to face in their tireless efforts of recovery, repatriation, protection, and commemoration. I am ready to hear about the unique barriers your communities have had and continue to have while doing this sacred work.
A key part of Murray's work will be recommending ways to strengthen federal laws and practices to preserve and protect burial sites. Murray says she will also work to dismantle colonial laws that obstruct Indigenous efforts to commemorate those who were victims of the residential school system. Leaders at the Summit of the Americas have begun work in Los Angeles. Key issues that will be discussed include health security, clean energy, and advancing democracy. A big issue for the U.S., host of the summit, is migration, and it's something the president of Mexico is trying to take advantage of. Evan Dyer explains.
As President Biden traveled to Los Angeles to inaugurate his Summit of the Americas today, much of the attention was focused on Mexico. Mexico's president, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, known to all as AMLO, chose to boycott the summit, complaining that 3 non-democratic countries, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua, haven't been invited. Meanwhile, a new migrant caravan was allowed to begin a journey from Mexico's southern border. Miguel Romo already crossed several borders with his wife and 3 children. Mexican authorities have stopped caravans in the past, but this time did little. Venezuelan migrant Angelica Larrazabal thanked Mexican authorities for giving her permission to cross. Her destination, she says, is Detroit. The timing of the caravan and the boycott of the summit by AMLO don't appear to be a coincidence, but rather a pressure tactic by Mexico's president in the run-up to the U.S. midterms, where the last thing the Biden administration needs is a new surge in illegal border crossings.
I read this more as a symbolic gesture to politically indicate to the United States how strongly it depends on Mexico now to shape current and future migration issues, and which strongly have and will have a political and economic effects within the United States.
The Canadian government has done its best to stay out of the dispute between its 2 free trade partners and says it's up to the host nation to draw up the guest list. But migration is an issue that Canada can't avoid, with people pouring out of Venezuela, Central America, and Haiti. The U.S. is looking to make a regional migration pact, and Canada will almost certainly be asked to play some kind of role. Evan Dyer, CBC News, Los Angeles.
A man is in hospital after he was shot in Toronto's Moss Park neighborhood early this morning. Police were called just before 3 a.m. to an apartment at 285 Shooter Street. They arrived to find a man suffering from a gunshot wound. He was taken to hospital with serious but non-life-threatening injuries. Investigators tell CBC they have reason to believe there could be multiple suspects. They are asking witnesses or anyone with video footage to come forward. A U.S. congressional committee in Washington heard heartbreaking testimony today from survivors and families of victims of mass shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo. That comes as a group of Democratic and Republican senators try to find an agreement on gun safety. Reporter Kate Fisher has the latest now from Washington.
Victims have been at the center of the congressional hearing on America's gun violence epidemic. 11-year-old Mia Cerillo witnessed the murder of 19 of her classmates and 2 of her teachers in a shooting at her elementary school last month in Uvalde, Texas.
When I went to the barracks, he shot my friend that was next to me, and I thought he was going to come back to the room, so I grabbed the blood and I put it all over me, and I grabbed my teacher's phone.
Felix and Kimberly Rubio's 10-year-old daughter, Lexi, was killed in the shooting. That morning, her parents had watched her receive a Good Citizen Award and be recognised as an A student at the school's awards ceremony.
To celebrate, we promised to get her ice cream that evening. I told her we loved her and we would pick her up after school. I can still see her walking with us toward the exit. I left my daughter at that school, and that decision will haunt me for the rest of my life.
She and her husband Felix demanded action from lawmakers on gun control.
Somewhere out there, there's a mom listening to our testimony, thinking I can't even imagine their pain, not knowing that our reality will one day be hers, unless we act now.
But progress is slow and unlikely. In the deeply divided Senate, a bipartisan group of lawmakers is working to find some common ground. They say they hope to reach a consensus by the end of the week. But even if they do, any new legislation is likely to be limited in scope. Kate Fisher for CBC News in Washington.
One person was killed and at least a dozen were hurt after a car slammed into a crowd of people in Berlin. The vehicle plowed into a school group that was visiting a popular shopping district. A teacher was killed. Police say the driver managed to get his car back on the road and then crashed through the front window of a shop about a block away. He's now in custody. Investigators are trying to determine if it was a deliberate attack or an accident possibly caused by a medical emergency. As Russian forces tighten their grip on the Donbas region in eastern Ukraine, hectic evacuation efforts are on the way. Buses are streaming west away from the intense fighting and continuous bombardment, and efforts are being made to make sure the most vulnerable get to safety. Margaret Evans has the story and a warning. Some of the material in this report is graphic.
Give me your tired and your poor. Young volunteers navigating the streets of Kramatorsk in eastern Ukraine. Here to help those too fragile to escape the war closing in all around them on their own. Lydia Boyko is 83, a nephew and his wife unable, they say, to care for her as she needs. It all feels a bit rough and tumble, but she holds her dignity. This isn't how goodbyes should be. Alla Lisitska is 80, like Boyko, traveling alone, one friend to see her off. I feel horrible, she says. I haven't left my apartment in 7 years, and the social workers have been taking care of me all that time. Social workers like Natalia work with the aid group East SOS to identify those who are ready to leave. The main argument is whether they're ready to stay without water and electricity. If the shelling gets worse, we ask them, and we can't come to help, are they ready to face that on their own? 3/4 of the city's residents have already left, the so-called Kramatorsk salient, flanked by Russian troops on 3 sides.
Kramatorsk became the de facto capital of the region after pro-Russian separatists took over Donetsk in 2014. In fact, they also took over Kramatorsk for a time. Now its fate hangs in the balance again.
The city was a major rail hub for those fleeing fighting in the east until April 8th, when a missile slammed into the station, killing more than 50 people. The only way out now is by road. The SOS passengers headed for the town of Pokrovsk, 60 kilometers to the southwest, where an evacuation train is waiting. The driver, Edward Skorik, volunteers because his own parents were helped in the same way. It's dangerous work, he says, but I feel it's my duty. Emergency workers are on hand to help with the boarding, more rough and tumble, until they're settled on board. They know only that they're heading west and that volunteers will be waiting on the other end. I'm not afraid of death, says Boyko, but the despair, hearing how they shoot, hearing how children cry, this is a terrible thing. And so the train pulls out, carrying its passengers, some full of hope and some who've lost it. Margaret Evans, CBC News, Kramatorsk.
When the Taliban seized control of Afghanistan last summer, there were real fears for the lives of girls and young women. One organization quickly sprung into action, coordinating a secret rescue mission for schoolgirls. Bonnie Allen introduces us to 3 young Afghans who made it to Canada and their daring escape to safety.
Tucked away on the top floor of this Saskatoon high school, the music room feels like home for Afghan refugee Farhang Nassar. Except here in Canada, she chooses to sing a Britney Spears song.
I love singing, I love piano, I love guitar, so I love stage, I love camera, I love microphone, yes.
Music and freedom are inseparable for Farhang and for her friends and fellow students from Afghanistan. Just 9 months ago, they attended the progressive Marifat High School in Kabul, famous for nurturing poor, persecuted children from the Hazara ethnic group, and for empowering and educating girls and women.
In Marifat, we learned that girls and boys are equal, but in our community, like, people say, no, boys are better, and like this.
Pushing those boundaries and shattering cultural norms put the spotlight on these young women. Mina Rizwani, an award-winning scholar. Benin Arjmand, an athlete who defied the patriarchy, excelling at martial arts, even showcased on YouTube. And Farhang Nisar, a singing sensation. Then, last August,
Afghanistan has new masters. 20 years after their first experiment in power came to a shattering end, the Taliban are back.
It was really shocking.
Their access to education, their dreams, their freedom, gone.
That time I feel I'm nothing. I have nothing more.
I was covering my hair and my face, just. And the men looked at me and they said that, oh, now it's right. Now you're okay. And I started to crying, and I had nothing to say.
They also knew their celebrity would make them targets, so they went into hiding, never imagining how they would come to live in Canada.
Large double, bagel. Which kind of bagel?
Their former music teacher, Mariam Masumi, was one of the first to learn that a top-secret mission was in the works to extract them from Afghanistan. But she had to act quickly without attracting Taliban attention.
I just thought that they will kill us. I just collect all the IDs, all the email addresses from the girls and from their families.
The young teacher and singer was also in hiding at the time. The Marifat school principal told her to send a list of students to a group called the 30 Birds Foundation. This group includes New York lawyer Jennifer Salendi and Afghan outreach worker Mohammed Baruzian in Chicago.
A shared belief in the need to help these girls brought us all together.
We were on Zoom, some of us in our pajamas, some in our beds, just looking at our spreadsheets, tracking who is where.
The 30 Birds Foundation raised millions of dollars and negotiated visas to save the girls from the Taliban.
Brutal repression, the sex slavery of the girls, forced marriages. These are highly educated girls. They were the most successful high school in Afghanistan. How can we possibly leave them to this horrid fate?
The girls and their families had to travel in small groups by road from Kabul to the northern city of Mazar-e-Sharif, where the 30 Birds Foundation had chartered a plane out of Afghanistan. They waited 2 weeks, but the Taliban refused to let the plane leave. So they changed course, making a 16-hour road trip through Taliban checkpoints to the border of Pakistan, which had promised temporary passes.
We were so scared. We just wore long hijabs and put masks to our faces that Taliban did not recognize us. And I deleted all my pictures from my phone. I deleted all the videos, all the documents that I had on my phone.
Here is Mariam crossing into Pakistan. The first group, totaling 250, would make their way to Saskatoon as Canadian government-sponsored refugees.
I mean, I really feel like they rescued themselves. They were the ones that had to make those brave, difficult choices and risk, going through Taliban checkpoints and crossing the border, leaving everything that they had known, the people that they had loved behind, for the possibility of a new life in Canada.
But not everyone made it into the first group. 209 refugees were left behind in Pakistan, nearly 60 of them unaccompanied young women. The 30 Birds Foundation has raised $3.5 million to privately sponsor them in Canada. Ottawa won't comment on their files for security reasons, but in other cases, private sponsorship has taken years. So for now, they wait.
We are worried about our friends there, about our friends in Islamabad. Banana.
Miriam misses her old life as a music teacher, but she's doing her best to build a new life in Canada.
I see my future so bright.
Benin feels the same way. She moved to Saskatoon with her parents and deeply misses the rest of her family. But she's excited to resume her passion for martial arts.
It makes me feel I'm alive still, and still there is a hope for me. It's still God didn't forget me.
Benin and the others are also focused on finishing high school. Mina plans to become an immigration lawyer, and Farhang, she's back front and center, determined to never hide from anyone ever again. Bonnie Allen, CBC News, Saskatoon.
Well, glad they're safe. The Toronto District School Board is changing the name of a Parkdale Elementary School. Queen Victoria Public School is now the Dr. Rita Cox Kinamogoka Public School. The move works to honor both the Toronto librarian and activist while addressing colonialism. Ali Kalata has the story.
There is power in a name, and now, say officials, opportunity.
It's a first step to create some reparations and healing in a community that has been harmed.
Racist letters sent to educators at the school in recent years prompted calls for the school to be renamed. After years of consultation, a committee voted to combine the Indigenous phrase Kinamagak, meaning all things grow well together, with the name of community leader and former librarian Dr. Rita Cox.
One of the ways racism manifests in Canada, and the myth of Canada as the nice Canada, is erasure. And so I think that through this, we very much recognize that learning for students around their identities, colonialism, the legacies of the people whose names or words that we brought forward are really speaking to the values that we hold and aspirationally hold, to encourage people to the students to move forward in a good way.
And allowing Dr. Rita Cox to stand as an example and inspiration. For decades, Cox created programs and initiatives in Toronto that promoted multiculturalism and literacy. She established the Black Heritage and West Indian Resource Collection, one of the most comprehensive collections of its kind in Canada. In 1997, her work earned her the Order of Canada. She remains, to this day, a fixture in the educational community.
I'm grateful, and of course, I'm much humbled and a little bit overwhelmed.
Hopeful, too, that the name change will continue to build upon her work.
That we can come together, that we have solidarity, that we have values, we have similar values, and in all our differences, we are still one.
New signs for the school have been ordered. They are expected to be in place for the start of the school year in September. Natalie Kalata, CBC News, Toronto.
Not a bad one out there today, Dahlia, but it's not going to last?
No, it sure is not going to last. So if you have plans for the weekend, make sure they're mostly indoors. But this is why. You're going to need your umbrellas. And like I said, those wet conditions are going to continue tomorrow. You're going to have a wet commute to work. Sorry to break it to you, folks, but there is some good news as we approach the weekend for us, and the flowers are going to bloom. I'll tell you when. But first, let's start off with the current temperature. 20 degrees in Toronto, in Markham, in Oshawa. A little bit on the cooler side in Kitchener and Hamilton, sitting at 19 degrees. Today's weather is not as humid as yesterday. Now, like I said, we are expecting that rain. As you can see, it's making its way from south of the border into Windsor, and it's creeping up to Toronto. By the evening, that will take place. As you can see, there is that precipitation activity coming through that started earlier today that's making its way into Toronto, and that will make its way up until tomorrow at 5 a.m. to your commute to work as you head into the Thursday afternoon, 5 p.m., you get a little bit of a break, but those clouds are still hovering over with a chance of showers, and it starts to clear up overnight on Thursday. Friday morning starting to look really nice, so we do get a little bit of that break. And the accumulation of rainfall, Windsor 12 millimeters, 11 millimeters in Toronto, and that will increase as we go into Thursday, 5 p.m. It will be 14 millimeters of accumulation of rain. Overnight tonight, we do see 40% chance of showers across the board. Mississauga, 12 degrees, a low 14 in Toronto, and St. Catharines, 13. As we head into Friday, you get that break that I was talking about, so you can make sure to enjoy it, because Saturday and Sundays with those wet conditions again, a bit on the cooler side. 22 degrees Saturday, 21 degrees on Sunday, 60% chance of rain. Monday, it's starting to feel a bit like summer again, so you might want to get ready, make some plans. I know it's the first day of work, but it's always a good time to enjoy that sunshine. 24 degrees.
Dalia, our plan will be to enjoy it on the way to work on Monday. Thank you.
Exactly.
More and more shoppers are turning to buy now, pay later plans to afford their purchases. Tech giants like Apple have been announcing their own payment programs, but some personal finance experts say these types of installment loans can put consumers in a tight spot. Nisha Patel explains.
So I may or may not have spent a little bit too much money on Shein, but I used Afterpay, so it's fine, right?
It's all over TikTok, shoppers boasting how much they've bought, spending little up front.
They don't necessarily have the financial muscle to buy the goods that are being offered.
So they turn to buy now, pay later services like Klarna, getting the goods now, but paying in installments over weeks or months. Afterpay, PayBright, and Sezzle are other big players. Now Apple is the latest to dive in with Apple Pay Later in the U.S., though no word just yet on when it might come to Canada.
You can now get that espresso machine you've wanted and pay for it over time with no additional cost.
While the loans aren't new, they've surged in popularity as more consumers shop online for just about anything you can click on.
It is going to become a lot more ubiquitous than it is today.
The companies make money by charging fees to the retailers, and many have no interest or late fees to consumers if you make the payments on time. Experts say buy now, pay later can seem better than credit cards, but they can also create bad financial habits, especially for younger shoppers.
When you pay with anything other than cash, you spend more because it doesn't feel like your money.
Julia Drybrow bought these Doc Marten shoes using buy now, pay later services.
When I, see that big extra, that big ticket item, and then I realize, I can do 6 payments of $14. That sounds so much easier.
Drybrow says she feels she can control her purchases, but agrees those who are less financially savvy might overspend.
I could absolutely see how it could, add up over time and become quite detrimental to someone's finances.
For big purchases, save for them. That's the discipline that you want to develop over time.
So that pay later doesn't cause pain later. Nisha Patel, CBC News, Toronto.
As we head to break, here's a look at where the markets closed today. The TSX closed down by 135 points. The Dow also falling by 269 points. The dollar traded higher at 79.74 cents US. Stay with us. We're coming right back. The arrival of warmer weather means an increasing threat of wildfires. Some areas of the country have already issued air quality warnings, including parts of northern Saskatchewan. Those warnings alert people with breathing difficulties to stay indoors and also to apply to farm animals with respiratory issues. Fiona Odlum has more.
Cassidy Zrudlo loves giving her horse Jellybean her favorite treat, carrots. But these days, Jellybean needs more than just carrots. She also gets asthma medication. She has equine asthma, also known as heaves, and it's part of her daily struggle.
We really have to watch the quality of hay that we're feeding her and make sure that it's, very, very minimal dust.
Dust and mold found in hay can trigger asthma attacks in horses with respiratory issues. And most recently, air quality concerns are another big factor. Zudro's main show jumping horse is now permanently scarred from wildfire smoke.
Because that horse had never had issues before, and with that smoke last summer, it was just enough to cause a lasting effect for her. So now we have to manage her as well.
and more horse owners are having to cope with equine asthma.
Probably 70 to 75% of horses will experience at least one asthma episode in their life. But then the horses that have this more chronic, severe form, it would be less than that, but certainly a significant number.
Montgomery says managing the horse's environment is key, from reducing dusty and moldy hay to supplementing with medicine like a puffer.
And it's basically inhalable steroid, which is also one of the components that's in many of the human puffers. And it specifically has a designed little adapter on it that fits into the left nostril of the horse.
Montgomery says she expects to see more horses presenting with equine asthma as air quality declines due to climate change, wildfires, and droughts, but says if properly managed, it's not a career-ending diagnosis. Back at Hampton Hills Farm, Zrudlo says Jellybean is worth the extra care.
I wouldn't change how everything happened for the world. She's such a nice horse.
Fiona Odlum, CBC News, Regina.
Little free library boxes that dot residential neighborhoods are a familiar sight. A Windsor woman decided to take a more creative approach, but instead of books, she stocked hers with small pieces of art.
This is our free little art gallery in Windsor. It's in a couple other cities. I've seen news reports about them, and I wanted to start one in Windsor. So you can take without leaving, you can leave without taking, or you can do both. I work in healthcare, and I know that expressing through art is a really helpful way to work yourself through things. It is the process, not the product. And the process is usually community sharing too. And so that's what I really love about this. It's got all kinds of pieces that I love. Me and my family started this because we wanted to help local artists. So the artists would put their stuff in there and they would share it, but also for anybody. I'm not an artist, but I have so much fun making little things and putting them in there.
I think especially recently there's been fewer and fewer ways for local artists to sort of express themselves and sort of be in a visible public space. A place where you can just sort of make your claim known with one little piece. Maybe you have a place to find you on the back if someone's interested in more of your work. It's a great avenue for people to appreciate art and people to get their art out there.
A giant mural unveiled just west of College in Spadina today. Its point to start an important conversation about mental health issues affecting Canadians.
I am so proud to see public art installations like this one focused on spreading messages related to mental health. Centering mental health through the arts in our communities and our conversations can help identify new pathways to thriving.
The mural was painted by Amanda Letterly, seen here in the center. They said it was based on a seek and find map idea they researched from children's books. Sun Life and Bentall Green Oak partnered with CAMH to put on the project. It gives a local artist who has lived experience with mental illness a chance to have their artwork featured on an exterior of the Bentall Green Oak building in Toronto. Grade 12 classes from the Jane and Finch area are celebrating their academic achievements today. Students are participating in a graduation walk from C.W. Jeffreys to York University. Organizers hope the walk will change the narrative around the North York community. Meg Roberts has the story.
In the words of Rihanna, you are shining bright like.
Also bright, the smiles seen on graduating students' faces from the Jane and Finch area. For the first time in 2 years, 4 grade 12 classes are celebrating in person, walking from C.W. Jeffreys to York University, commemorating where they've come from, but also looking forward to what's ahead.
I'm going to York University on a full scholarship.
Yeah. You must be proud of yourself.
Yeah, I'm proud. Yeah, I worked really hard for it, so I'm pretty excited to start a new chapter in my life.
We all really worked hard. And having it celebrated like this makes us feel good about ourselves and all the hard work we've put in.
Organizers have hosted the event for the last 9 years, although the past 2 were virtual. Exciting news for students from C.W. Jeffreys, Westview, Emery, and Downsview. The walk was organized to change the narrative around the schools in the Jane and Finch area. Ida Sadu is one of the founders.
Sometimes when we think of certain communities, we get a one story.
Today, we want to impact the narrative of the one story. Jane and Finch is a mighty community. Greatness and assets are here.
So Nahila, you're a grade 12 student. What does it feel like being out here today?
I'm like really happy to, represent my school and like have a day off of school too. So being in school for so long and finally like being over that, it's good.
June 8th, 2022, this is the day. A different story coming at you.
Meg Roberts, CBC News, Toronto.
Yeah, one of those stories. Congratulations to all of the graduates right across the GTA. Job well done, kids.
Congrats indeed. And a good day to celebrate with the weather that was today, but unfortunately tonight it is going to rain. It's going to be 14 degrees. Tomorrow afternoon, risk of thunderstorm, 23 degrees. Dwight.
That is our show for tonight. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you back here tomorrow at 6. Stay safe out there and have a great night, everybody.